The year is 1991, and a funeral is taking place at a church in Brannigan, Michigan. The funeral is for a man named Chuck, who was a World War II veteran. His daughter, Marie, gets up on the podium and has some words to say about her late father. Meanwhile, sitting outside smoking a cigarette is Chuck's widow, Ethel. An elderly gentleman named Jack joins Ethel as he remarks that she doesn't usually smoke. Ethel responds that she has decided to take up smoking again. And just then they are interrupted by Jack's son, Peter, who apologizes to Ethel for being late. Jack takes his leave as he has to attend to something, leaving Peter and Ethel to speak. Peter offers his condolences, but is taken aback by Ethel's indifference over her husband's passing, and states that she's unsure that the two of them ever loved one another. The film then cuts to a boy named Jimmy, who lives in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Jimmy ventures up a hill and runs into an elderly gentleman named Quinlan, who isn't too pleased to see the young man, as he knows his grandmother. Quinlan questions Jimmy on why he is there, as it is far too dangerous as the ERA and British Army are constantly fighting. Jimmy replies by asking him what he is digging for, and that he can confide in him as he is good at keeping secrets. Quinlan asks Jimmy if he can name one secret he has kept, which is a trick question, and Jimmy subsequently reveals a secret about his grandmother hiding photographs of the war. Quinlan responds to this harshly, calling Jimmy a half-wit and saying that is the reason his mother left him. This saddens Jimmy, who disappointing walks away, but is stopped by the older man who realizes he unnecessarily hurt his feelings. Quinlan asks Jimmy to help him dig, and Jimmy asks him what they are digging for, and is told that it's for treasure relating to the past. Back at the funeral, Chuck's casket is lowered into his grave, while Jack flies over in an old military plane. Everyone cheers, except for Marie, who is annoyed by how low Jack flew, and remarks that he's just doing it to impress Ethel. We are shown a scene from the past in Belfast. The year is 1941 and Quinlan is a child at the time. The local community has gathered in a shelter while the sirens go off. An older boy, named Cathal, joins up with them and asks Quinlan if he would like to join the Irish Republic Army as he has. Before Quinlan can answer Cathal, an older gentleman interrupts him and calls Cathal a traitor, which infuriates him. Just then, there is a knock on the door of the shelter by a British Army officer, and Cathal takes out his revolver as his side are fighting against the British. However, Cathal puts his pistol away after protests by the rest of the people in the shelter. The British officer comes in and sees the revolver that belongs to Cathal, but mistakes it for belonging to Quinlan. The locals quickly realize that Quinlan is in hot water, so lie on his behalf, convincing the officer that the revolver belonged to Quinlan's father, and that he is just playing with it. Back in the present day, Jimmy asks Quinlan if what they're busy digging for is just a piece of metal, and is corrected by Quinlan, who states they are digging for aluminium. Quinlan reveals that the largest piece of aluminium he ever found was from a B-17, and is annoyed when Jimmy thinks that he is referring to a music band and not a plane. He reveals to Jimmy that the incident took place 50 years ago, and that he heard the crash that cost 10 people their lives. While his facial expression changes to that of sadness, Jimmy questions Quinlan on why he is bothering to dig up something like that in the first place. Quinlan doesn't answer him, instead asking him to shut up and help him continue his digging, which Jimmy does. The scene cuts to Michigan, in 1941. Ethel at this time is a young woman who has gone to see a military plane landing, while a band is marching in the background. She very excitedly rushes to an oncoming truck driven by a young soldier and gets into the vehicle as the two of them drive away. Two young soldiers get out of the plane. They are Chuck and Teddy, who are both delighted to see Ethel and the driver of the truck, who is a young Jack. The four of them hurry away and Teddy suggests they all go out together, and Ethel laughs at the suggestion as she states that she'll be in trouble if she misses any more classes. Interestingly, Ethel seems much closer to Teddy rather than her future husband, Chuck. The four of them are sat together at a diner, and Teddy shares stories of his adventures with the Air Force with Ethel, who is gazing at him with interest. Jack senses this and asks Chuck if he has any cash, who immediately realizes that this is Jack's way of giving Teddy and Ethel some privacy. Soon the time comes for Jack, Chuck, and Teddy to head back to the barracks, and Ethel watches them fondly, especially Teddy, who turns back to wave at her. In the present, Ethel, Jack, and Marie arrive back at their home from Chuck's funeral. Ethel is still emotionless over the loss of her husband, and before he leaves, Jack reminds her that she should grieve. Ethel then asks her daughter to put back the photo of her father with his military friends and assures Marie that she didn't sleep with anyone. Marie is then taken by surprise when her mother asks her if she has considered a relationship with Jack's son, Peter. Confused by her mother's question, Marie responds that she believes Peter is a nice guy. but she isn't ready for a relationship just yet. She then voices her anger at her mother, who seems indifferent to the fact that her husband was just buried. Ethel apologizes, admitting that Chuck was a fine man. Marie is then surprised when she sees her mother fight back tears, stating that she was always faithful to Chuck and that she never slept with any of his friends. Back in 1941, Jack, Chuck, and Ethel go to meet Teddy, who is busy building a house on a piece of land he has acquired. Jack and Chuck go out together to fetch something Teddy needs, leaving Ethel and him to talk about their future. Teddy reveals that he has joined the army to fight in the war, and hopefully gain the rank of sergeant so that he may be able to ask Ethel's parents for her hand in marriage. Ethel is moved by this, asking him if he is building the house for her as well, which he admits. Jack and Chuck arrive back at the building site. However, they quickly realize that Ethel and Teddy are sharing an intimate moment, so they take their leave. In present-day Belfast, Jimmy has found what Quinlan claims to be a switch, presumably for a bomb. Jimmy is asked if he wants to press the switch, but he is reluctant and then asks Quinlan to do it himself. As Quinlan presses the switch, a bomb goes off in the distance. However, this bomb has nothing to do with a switch, but rather the ERA, who have two members standing on the same hill as Quinlan and Jimmy. The two ERA members get into an argument, and the younger one storms off, while the older member stands on the hill, and he and Quinlan exchange looks. We learn that the older ERA member is in fact Cathal, and it seems he and Quinlan are no longer as close as they were when they were children. The scene cuts to Michigan 1941, and Ethel is dancing with Chuck in Teddy's now completed home. The four friends are enjoying one another's company, Teddy and Ethel seemingly now closer than ever when it is announced on the radio that the USA has decided to fight in World War II. Ethel is devastated to realize that she may never see her two friends and boyfriend ever again. As the three young men prepare to be drafted for the war, Teddy and Ethel have a conversation where he reveals to her that he's going to be a gunner, while Chuck is set to be a pilot and Jack a navigator. Ethel gets up and asks if that's it, if their relationship ends here. Teddy is surprised and confused, promising her that he will send back postcards every day and that he has specially built this house for the two of them for when he gets back. Ethel tearfully replies that this house will never be a home for her without him. Teddy, with a firm resolve in his voice, states that the two of them will get married, in secret if they have to. He then gets up and kneels beside Ethel, taking a ring from his pocket which she takes and leaves the room. Teddy goes upstairs to see that Ethel has worn the ring, and when he comes into the room, she embraces him and promises him that she will love no one besides him till the day she dies. In the present, Ethel is in that same room, meaning she moved into the home Teddy built for her. However, the room is Marie's, and she is confused as to why her mother is in it and speaking to herself. Marie asks Ethel to come with her to Chuck's grave, and Ethel, still in a daze, refuses to do so. She then asks her daughter to move her belongings as she intends to move into this room. Marie, confused as to why her mother refuses to mourn the loss of her husband, marches out of the room. Later, Marie meets with Jack and Peter at a restaurant, where she asks to speak to Jack alone, so Peter leaves them briefly. Marie asks Jack what Ethel meant when she told her daughter that her life was over by age 21. He quickly answers that Ethel is speaking about the war, though Marie knows that there's more to the story that both he and her mother aren't telling her. Jack goes on to say that Chuck was nursed back to health by Ethel. However, she revealed to Marie that it was Chuck who had saved her. Jack advises Marie to let the past be the past, to not dig for information, and asks her to leave, which she does. Peter then comes back concerned and asks his father what he said to Marie, to which he replies that he said too much, but not enough. Elsewhere, back in Belfast, Jimmy is cleaning a ring he found while digging with Quinlan. He finds that the ring has graving on the inside, which reads, Ethel and Teddy. The scene then cuts to another flashback. This time Chuck and Jack meet up with Teddy at his home, just before they set out to be drafted for the war. Teddy insists on sharing a beer beforehand as he points out that the two of them are officers, and as a result, he will hardly have contact with them during the war. However, Jack is confused, as he reveals that he has been dating a girl who works in administration and has pulled some strings to have the three of them assigned to the same plane. Teddy strongly refuses this, as he points out that if something were to happen to that plane, all three of them would die, and that can't happen as someone will have to look after Ethel. Jack replies that neither of them other than Teddy can do that for Ethel, though is stunned into silence when Teddy asks his two friends if they're truly also not in love with Ethel. Stunned by the question, Jack is adamant that he isn't in love with her, while Chuck stays silent. Teddy realizes that Chuck is also in love with Ethel, though Chuck assures him that he will never tell her and that she's his. However, Teddy asks him to cease his explanations, as he wants him to take care of Ethel if he doesn't make it back. He makes Chuck promise, which he reluctantly does, as does Jack. The three friends say a last prayer together, which Teddy leads, asking God for help as he is getting married today and heading out for combat tomorrow. Back in the present, Jack comes to visit Ethel's home, carrying flowers when he is greeted at the door by Marie. He apologizes for not bringing Pete, whom Marie admits she likes, but states that being with him is hardly appropriate right now. Jack is surprised by the loud music playing upstairs, and Marie explains that her mother is still acting strange, now refusing to even go to Chuck's grave. Jack heads upstairs to see Ethel when Marie informs him she has moved into her room. This stops Jack in his tracks, who asks if she has moved back to that room. This confuses Marie, who is adamant that that room has always been hers. Hearing this, Jack hands the flowers to Marie and apologizes before walking out, saying he'll come back another time. Just then, the phone rings and Marie is surprised to hear that someone calling from Belfast wants to speak to her mother. Jimmy is the one calling, and for some reason, he is eager to speak to Ethel. Marie informs her mother that she has a phone call, and Ethel is uninterested at first. But when she learns that it's from Belfast, this catches her attention. Ethel answers the phone and is informed by Jimmy that he has a ring which reads Ethel and Teddy, and he believes it belongs to her. Suddenly, Jimmy runs out of change and is unable to expand any further. However, this is enough for Ethel, as she hangs up and stares at the ceiling. The next day, Jimmy visits Quinlan. He is excited to share his findings with Quinlan, even revealing that he found the rightful owner of the ring, who is located across the Atlantic. However, Quinlan is not too best pleased, wanting no part of Jimmy's discovery. Although Jimmy explains that he only wants to use his phone, as he has run out of change for the payphone. Reluctantly, Quinlan invites him into his home, but instructs him not to touch anything. In a flashback, Jack is at an airbase and calls Ethel and Chuck, who has come back home from the war because of an eye injury. Ethel is excited to speak to her friend, though Jack seems unhappy, and not because he has broken his ankle, as he tells her. He asks Ethel to give the phone to Chuck, which she does, and as soon as Chuck answers, Jack pleads for him to keep smiling as he speaks to him. Jack breaks down in tears, and Chuck hangs up the phone. Ethel asks Chuck why he hung up, as she wanted to speak to Jack as well. However, Chuck simply turns to her and states that he would give anything not to tell her. This is more than an answer for her. Jimmy calls up Ethel again, and he reveals to her that he found her ring on Black Mountain in Belfast, and that he believes it belongs to a deceased airman whose plane crashed there during the war. He asks Ethel if she would like him to send the ring to her, which she declines, as she believes the ring belonged to Teddy. She also corrects him that the ring doesn't have the etching Ethel and Teddy, but Ethel and Teddy, as the two of them were married. Jimmy replies that the Veterans Office stated that Teddy wasn't married, which prompts Ethel to hang up. Before Jimmy leaves, he admits to Quinlan that he doesn't think he can keep the ring at home, so would like him to keep it, much to his surprise. The scene cuts back to 1941, and Ethel and Teddy are getting married in a church. Jack and Chuck drag along one of their friends, named Wilbur, who is training to be a priest, and despite his protests that he isn't qualified to marry anyone, the young couple get married. Back in Belfast, Jimmy is digging on the mountain again, when he spots a falcon tugging at something. He goes to investigate, and to his delight, it's a watch. However, when he pulls the watch out of the earth, he is horrified when he realizes it is still attached to the body. Later, Jimmy is taken by a group of Irish loyalists, who interrogate him about people he may know who are connected to the Republicans. They show Jimmy a series of photographs and ask him to identify the men in them. Jimmy is frightened, and names Quinlan and admits he recognizes another man, who is identified as Cathal. The loyalists begin to blackmail Jimmy, stating that they have no intention of letting him go unless he helps them find Cathal. Reluctantly, a sobbing Jimmy agrees to help them if they let him go. But as he agrees, one of them punches him square in the nose, and their leader states that it would look suspicious if they don't rough him up before releasing him. Jimmy arrives back at his grandmother's home, blood still pouring out his nose. He is surprised to see Quinlan there, and even more surprised to see Cathal there also. Cathal immediately asks Jimmy who he has been talking to about him, and Quinlan tries to interject on Jimmy's behalf. Jimmy tries to convince Cathal that he has not said anything to anyone. However, Cathal doesn't believe him, threatening to shoot him in the knees. Eventually, Cathal takes his leave from the back door. Quinlan then gives Jimmy some money and asks him to do him a favor, to go to America and take the ring back to its rightful owner. This is Quinlan's way of getting Jimmy out of Belfast, as the city is no longer safe for him. Jimmy then steps outside, and he is again threatened by the loyalist thugs, who also threaten to harm his grandmother this time. Later, Jimmy is at a phone booth, once again trying to speak to Ethel. She is confused by Jimmy calling her again. However, Jimmy is desperate and asks if he can come to the United States to give her the ring. Ethel is reluctant as she has never met this young man, though she eventually concedes and invites Jimmy to her home. In a flashback, Chuck and Jack are reunited after their part in the war is over with injuries. Chuck reveals he has a serious eye injury and will likely be blind from one eye, and Jack has a broken ankle. He then admits to Jack that he feels like Ethel could never love him, though she may be able to love Jack, and wishes Teddy had asked Jack instead of him to take care of his wife. Jack is accepting no doubt from Chuck, reminding him that Teddy chose him. In the present, Marie has asked Jack and Peter to come by their home, as she is growing increasingly concerned about her mother. Ethel comes downstairs, and Jack asks her what she is doing, to which she responds that she wants him to go pick up a man named Jimmy who is from Belfast. Jack is confused and has no idea why Ethel doesn't open up to her daughter about her past. Begrudgingly, Ethel admits that she hasn't been all that motherly to Marie, and that it was her father who showered her with love when she was growing up. As a result, Ethel feels as if Marie will not understand her mother's feelings. She then again Jack to make his way to the airport to pick up her guest, which he does with immense reluctance. Later that day, Jimmy arrives with Jack at Ethel's house. Ethel is very pleased to see him, while Peter and Marie stand in the living room confused. Jimmy excitedly reveals that he has bought her a full suitcase of stuff, much to Jack's dismay, who sits in the back of the room and groans. Jimmy opens the suitcase and reveals he collected the pieces of the plane that was carrying Teddy and crashed in 1944. He asks Ethel if she has a place for all this, which she confirms she does, and asks Peter and Jack for some tools so she can take down a wall. Marie tries to stop her mother, as the wall has pictures and memories of her father, though Ethel snaps that this home was never Chuck's. The wall is taken down, and it is revealed that Ethel had hidden all her mementos of Teddy behind the wall, which shocks Marie. Ethel's daughter angrily snaps at both Jack and her mother, proclaiming that she never loved Jack or her, and instead locked her love for Teddy behind a wall in the house they shared. Marie asks Peter if she can stay with him and storms off, and Peter angrily states that both his father and Ethel should have revealed the truth to Marie much sooner. In a flashback, Teddy and Jack are on a plane to Belfast. This was during their war campaign. Jack gets well acquainted with Elena, Jimmy's grandmother, who tries to flirt with Teddy, but is respectfully turned down. Jack and Elena dance together, and when Elena leaves, Jack admits to his friend that he plans on marrying Elena and will ask her tonight. However, Teddy asks him to reconsider as he is drunk and emotional. This infuriates Jack, pointing out that he got his love and gave it away to Chuck, but not him because he's not good enough. This confuses Teddy, and he walks up to his friend and asks him once again if he loves Ethel, which he again denies and reiterates his intention on marrying Elena. Teddy responds that he doesn't think he should as she's a tart, which angers Jack to the point that he swings for Teddy, who pushes him back, causing a barrel to fall on his foot and breaking his ankle. In the present, Jack admits he lied to Teddy. He loved Ethel to the point it determined him to stay in the war once his ankle healed. He reveals the whole truth to Marie, even admitting that 3 guys wanted Ethel, and 2 got her. Peter then comes into the room, holds Marie's hand, and angrily asks if his father is trying to make her go back home, which she denies. Jack reveals that Ethel is meanwhile enjoying her time with Jimmy, who has gotten her to speak more than she has in a long time. Marie then admits that she never heard her mother say she loved Chuck, not once, and they hardly spoke throughout all the years they spent together. Jack dismisses this, assuring her that they had their good times, and that Chuck could have perished with joy the day Marie was born. Marie asks Jack if he wishes that he had just married Ethel, which moves Jack to tears, and he asks her to not ask him that question. He reveals that he was also supposed to be on that plane. The only reason he wasn't was because he had hurt his ankle, and they had to get an inexperienced navigator instead. Sometime in the near future, Jimmy finds his way back to Belfast, and Elena and Quinlan are delighted by his return. Outside Elena's house waits Ethel, who has come to Belfast with Jimmy. Quinlan joins the 3 for tea, where Elena recalls that she almost married an American soldier who broke his foot. Ethel immediately identifies the man as Jack, and Elena is shocked she knows his name. Jimmy bursts into laughter at the thought of his grandmother with Jack, though Elena quickly asks him to shut his mouth. Ethel then asks Elena if she knew Teddy, to which she responds that she cannot remember, though she seems like she doesn't want to admit that she did. Meanwhile, Marie and Peter find Jack at a diner, drunk and almost unconscious at a table. Marie asks Jack if her father ever revealed to Ethel that the reason he married her was because Teddy had made him promise. Jack denies that neither Chuck nor he ever told her that, because he didn't think it was any of his business. Peter calls his father a coward, as he not only lied to Ethel and Teddy, but he lied to himself. Marie and Peter ask Jack to go get Ethel and to be honest with her for the first time. Back in Belfast, Ethel joins Jimmy and Quinlan in searching for pieces of Teddy's plane. Ethel asks Quinlan if he believes in promises, and especially promises to the deceased. Quinlan responds that he does indeed, though Jimmy interjects and argues that promises are stupid, as he breaks small promises to his grandmother all the time, even though he doesn't mean to. The next morning, Ethel is staring at a picture of Teddy and holding the ring as she looks at it when suddenly a bomb goes off in the street, the explosion of which sends Ethel flying back from the window. The noise wakes up both Jimmy and Elena, who initially believes the Germans have come back. Jimmy rushes to Ethel's room, who is lying face first in the bed. He runs towards her and helps her up, informing her that they must evacuate. A nearby British soldier is immediately eliminated by the bomb, and Ethel ends up sitting beside him and holding his hand. Quinlan sees this, and the police officers ask him to stay behind the line, though he states that there's something he must tell her. Meanwhile, Jimmy runs up the hill after he sees Ethel comforting the expiring soldier and runs towards Cathal, who he suspects is behind the explosions. Just then, Jack gets out of a cab and reunites with Elena, who informs him of Ethel's whereabouts. Jimmy finally reaches Cathal, pleading with him to not set off the second explosion. However, Cathal doesn't have any plans to listen to Jimmy and instead points a gun at him, instructing him to leave. Suddenly, Cathal is shot by the Loyalists, who have followed Jimmy right to Cathal's location. Back at Eleanor's street, Quinlan slowly approaches Ethel and asks her to back away from the soldier, as the second bomb may not end her life like she wants. Ethel admits that Quinlan is brave, but that this is none of his concern. Quinlan replies that Teddy wouldn't want that, and that he's not brave at all, revealing to Ethel that Teddy was alive after the crash. This catches Ethel's attention, and she is rendered speechless. In a flashback, we see a young Quinlan kneeling beside the wreckage of Teddy's plane. Teddy is covered in blood and knows that he hasn't long, so he tries to hand the ring Ethel gave to him to Quinlan, asking if he could give this to her and inform her that she is now free to choose her future. Quinlan promises Teddy, though he is unable to take the ring as fire engulfs the wreckage, and he has to run away to save himself. In the present, Quinlan is now sitting beside Ethel, admitting that he searched for the ring all his life as he wanted to honor Teddy's final request. Quinlan begins to cry as he apologizes to Ethel, informing her that she is free. Ethel kisses the hand of the deceased soldier, as both Jack and Quinlan plead with her to get out of the potential blast area. Meanwhile, Cathal is still alive despite being shot, and even though Jimmy tries to stop him from setting off the detonator, the bomb ends up detonating. Luckily, Quinlan and Ethel have enough time to evacuate the area. Sometime in the near future, Jimmy, Quinlan, and Elena are sitting on top of Black Mountain, looking over Belfast. Jimmy asks Quinlan if he's ever been in love, which he quickly responds that he has not, as it seems like too much trouble. Elsewhere on the mountain, Ethel and Jack are on a walk, laughing as they talk about how old they are now. Ethel sees the falcon again and admits that she'd love to fly, to which Jack says that he'll take her up in his plane sometime. She says that Teddy wanted to take her, and Jack replies that she talks too much about him. Even though he was the greatest man in the world when he was alive, he has been the biggest pain since his demise. The two of them both burst into laughter at this comment, but the laughs turned into tears for Ethel. She begins sobbing, and Jack can't help but be taken aback by finally seeing Ethel be emotional, grieving the loss of both Teddy and Chuck. Ethel asks Jack what is happening to her, and the two of them embrace as two falcons fly above them.